Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Anthony always believed he knew his life inside and out. 38 years old, an architect specializing in luxury residential projects, married for 9 years to Natalie, a digital marketing consultant who worked from home. They had a 7-year-old son named Ethan, a comfortable house in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, and a routine that ran like clockwork. Anthony left for the office downtown every morning at 7:30, came home at 6, had dinner with his family, helped Ethan with his homework, and sometimes watched an episode of a show with Natalie before bed. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was stable, predictable, secure. Or at least that's what he thought. That Thursday in October, Anthony left the office early. A client had cancelled a meeting at the last minute, and he decided to take advantage of the sunny afternoon to get home sooner than usual. When he opened the front door at 3:40 p.m., he found Ethan sitting on the living room couch, colored pencils scattered across the coffee table, focused on a drawing. The boy looked up and smiled when he saw his dad. "Dad! You came home early." Anthony set his leather briefcase down by the door and walked over to his son, loosening his tie. "Yep, champ. My client cancelled, so I figured I'd come home and see you. What are you drawing?" Ethan held up the paper proudly, showing bright colors and shapes only a 7-year-old could create. "Look, Daddy. I drew Mommy kissing Coach David." The sentence came out with the innocence of someone who didn't fully grasp the weight of his words. Anthony felt something odd in his stomach, a cold sensation that started in his chest and ran down his spine. He took the paper from Ethan's hands and examined it closely. 2 adult figures, one clearly with long hair like Natalie's, the other in shorts and a shirt like the uniforms worn by the soccer coaches. And yes, they were kissing, with hearts drawn all around them. "When did you see this, Ethan?" Anthony asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, as if he were just curious. The boy turned his attention back to another drawing he was starting, this time of a dinosaur. "Last week, after practice. They were in Mommy's car. I thought it was funny." Anthony placed the paper back on the table, his heart pounding. He heard footsteps upstairs. Natalie was coming down the stairs, wearing leggings and a casual top, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked surprised to see him. "You're home early today." Anthony picked up the drawing and stood, walking over to her. His eyes met hers before he held out the paper. "What's this about?" The question came out colder than he'd intended. Natalie took the drawing, glanced at it quickly, and let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that? Kid stuff, honey. You know how imaginative Ethan is. He probably saw something on TV or mixed up something that happened at practice. Kids do that all the time, blend reality with fantasy." She handed the paper back to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, then walked into the kitchen. "I'll start dinner. I was thinking about making that grilled chicken you like." Anthony stood in the living room, holding the drawing, watching Natalie move around the kitchen as if nothing had happened. But something inside him had changed. That explanation that came too fast, that forced laugh, the way she avoided his gaze, he'd known Natalie for over 10 years. He knew when she was lying. During dinner, he watched his wife with new eyes. The way she checked her phone between bites, the way she smiled briefly at the screen before turning it off and placing it face down on the table. Little details that used to go unnoticed now screamed in his mind. That night, after they'd put Ethan to bed, Natalie said she was going to take a relaxing bath. Anthony heard the shower water start running, and after a few minutes of hesitation, he walked into the bedroom. Natalie's phone was on the dresser, charging. He glanced at the bathroom door, then at the device. He'd never done this before. Never felt the need. But now, with that drawing burning in his memory and Natalie's unsatisfying explanation echoing in his ears, he picked up the phone. The screen lit up, asking for a 6-digit passcode. He tried Ethan's birthday. Incorrect. He tried their wedding anniversary. Incorrect. He tried her birthday. Incorrect. He frowned. Natalie always used fingerprint unlock, he'd never paid attention to the code. And now, apparently, she'd changed it to a password he couldn't guess. The water stopped. Anthony quickly put the phone back exactly where it had been and left the room, heading downstairs to the living room. He sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but his mind was somewhere else. Over the next 2 days, Anthony watched Natalie like a detective would watch a suspect. On Saturday morning, during Ethan's soccer practice, he stayed in his car at a distance, watching through the windshield. He saw Natalie chatting animatedly with David, the coach, a 32-year-old man, single according to rumors among the parents, who'd moved to Charlotte 6 months ago to take over the youth soccer program. Tall, athletic, with the kind of easy smile that made moms laugh just a little too loudly. Anthony watched their body language, the way Natalie touched David's arm when she laughed, the way she tilted her head in a manner Anthony recognized, the way the two drifted slightly away from the group of other parents, creating a private bubble of conversation. On Sunday night, after another dinner where Natalie seemed more interested in her phone than in conversation, Anthony made a decision. On Monday, during his lunch break, he searched for private investigators in Charlotte. He found James Morton, an investigator with over 15 years of experience and outstanding online reviews, who specialized in cases of marital infidelity. Anthony called and scheduled a meeting for 2 p.m. at a discreet cafe 20 minutes from downtown. James was a man in his mid-50s, with gray hair and an unremarkable appearance that would blend easily into any crowd, exactly the kind of person you wouldn't notice following you. They sat at a table in the back of the cafe, away from the windows. Anthony explained everything, the drawing, Natalie's evasive explanation, the changed phone passcode, the behavior at soccer practice. James listened in silence, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. When Anthony finished, the investigator closed the notebook and looked him straight in the eye. "I'll be direct. Based on what you've told me, there's enough reason to investigate. I can have results in 48 to 72 hours. I work within the law, but I'm efficient. If your wife is having an affair, I'll document it, photos, times, locations. Everything you need to be certain." Anthony nodded and signed the service agreement, providing photos of Natalie and David he'd found in the soccer parents' WhatsApp groups, license plate numbers, addresses, and practice schedules. James guaranteed complete discretion. Over the next 2 days, Anthony lived in a kind of trance. He went to work, pretended everything was normal, had dinner with his family, but his mind was constantly on what James might be uncovering. At 3 p.m. on Wednesday, his phone rang. It was James. "I need to meet with you. I have results." They arranged to meet at the same cafe in 1 hour. When Anthony walked into the cafe, James was already seated, a brown folder on the table. There were no warm greetings. The investigator simply opened the folder and began laying photos on the table, one by one. Anthony felt his blood run cold. The first photo showed Natalie and David walking together into an apartment on a residential street Anthony didn't recognize. The timestamp read Tuesday, 2:32 p.m., the exact time Natalie had said she'd be in an important virtual client meeting. The second photo showed them leaving the same apartment 2 hours later. Natalie was fixing her hair, David was adjusting his shirt. The third photo was even worse, a kiss in the parking lot near her car, just seconds before they entered the apartment. James placed more documents on the table. "I managed to intercept some messages. I won't go into the methods, but everything was obtained legally. Here." He slid printouts of WhatsApp conversations toward Anthony. The messages were explicit, declarations of desire, plans for meetings, complaints about having to wait until the next practice to see each other, inside jokes indicating deep intimacy. "Based on the earliest messages I could access, this has been going on for at least 4 months. Since July." Anthony picked up one of the photos, his hands trembling slightly. 4 months. 120 Days of Lies. Of false goodnight kisses. Of hollow I love yous. Of family dinners pretending everything was fine. There's one more thing, James continued, his voice lower now. The apartment they meet in belongs to a friend of David's. I spoke discreetly with some neighbors, posing as someone interested in renting in the area. Apparently, David uses the place several times a week, and your wife isn't the only woman he takes there. Anthony's eyes snapped up. What? James nodded grimly. David's involved with at least one other soccer mom, possibly more. It's a pattern. He's charming, has easy access through the practices, and apparently has no scruples. Anthony paid James in cash, thanked him in an automatic tone, and left the cafe holding the brown folder as if it burned his hands. He got in his car, sat down, and remained still for several long minutes, staring into space. Then, with careful deliberation, he opened the folder again and looked at the photos one last time. His wife, the woman he'd married 9 years ago in a beautiful ceremony with 150 guests, the mother of his child, kissing another man, walking into an apartment with another man, lying to him every single day. He closed the folder, started the car, and drove home. It was Wednesday. He would confront Natalie on Friday night, after Ethan's soccer practice, once he was sure the boy would be sleeping soundly. He wanted to see it all one more time, with his own eyes, now that he knew the truth. On Friday, Anthony told Natalie he had an important work call and wouldn't be able to take Ethan to practice. She seemed relieved, which only confirmed everything. But instead of staying home, Anthony drove to the soccer field and parked across the street, at a spot with a clear view but far enough away not to be noticed. He watched Natalie arrive with Ethan, watched his son run onto the field, watched his wife walk over to David. To any observer, their conversation seemed casual, but Anthony now recognized the signs, the touch on the arm, the smile that lingered a second too long, the way she leaned her body toward him, the way David looked at her when he thought no one was watching. Throughout the entire hour-long practice, Natalie and David chatted and laughed, and at one point, when they were farther from the other parents, Anthony saw David quickly slide his hand across her waist. A swift gesture, almost imperceptible, but it said everything. Anthony drove back home before practice ended. He needed to keep up appearances for a few more hours. When Natalie and Ethan arrived, he greeted them normally, had dinner with them, watched Ethan bathe, read him a bedtime story, and waited until the boy was fast asleep. At 8:30 p.m., Anthony walked downstairs and found Natalie on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. She looked up and smiled. Ethan fell asleep fast tonight. I guess practice wore him out. Anthony didn't smile back. Natalie, we need to talk. Something in his tone made her tense. About what? He walked to the coffee table and placed the brown folder on it, opening it to reveal the scattered photos. Natalie turned pale instantly. Her eyes scanned the images, her and David entering the apartment, her and David kissing, screenshots of explicit messages. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for several seconds. Anthony, I can explain, he raised his hand, cutting her off. No. You can't. There's no explanation that justifies this. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried a coldness Natalie had never heard before. 4 months, Natalie. For 4 months you looked me in the eye every day and lied. For 4 months you kissed that man and then came home and pretended to love me. Our 7-year-old son drew you cheating, and you had the nerve to tell me it was his imagination. Natalie started crying, tears streaming down her face. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. He made me feel special. You're always so busy with work. I felt alone. Anthony stepped back when she tried to move closer. Don't try to blame this on me. I work to support this family, to pay for this house, Ethan's soccer lessons, the clothes you wear, the car you drive. And I always came home. I was always faithful. I always respected you. You had a choice in every single moment of those 4 months, and in every one, you chose to betray our family. Please, Anthony, I'll end it with him tomorrow. I'll never see him again. We can go to couples therapy, we can fix this." Her voice was desperate, broken. Anthony shook his head. "No. There's nothing to fix. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our son. He saw you two kissing, Natalie. A 7-year-old child had to process that alone because you told him not to tell anyone. You turned our son into an accomplice in your lie. That's something I'll never forgive." He gathered the photos and carefully put them back in the folder. "You'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow morning, I want you to pack your things and leave. Go to your sister's, get a hotel, I don't care. But you won't sleep in this house with me again." Natalie collapsed into sobs, dropping to her knees. "Please, don't do this. I love you. I love our family." Anthony looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in 9 years of marriage, he felt nothing but emptiness. "If you loved us, you wouldn't have done what you did." He went upstairs to Ethan's room and watched his son sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had just shattered their family. He quietly closed the door and went to the master bedroom, locking himself inside. He heard Natalie crying downstairs for over an hour before the sounds finally stopped. The next morning, a gray October Saturday, Anthony woke early. Natalie was already up, packing clothes into a suitcase in the guest room. Her eyes were red and swollen. They exchanged no words. He made breakfast for Ethan when the boy woke up, calmly explaining that Mommy would need to stay somewhere else for a while and that they'd talk more about it later. Ethan, with the simplicity of children, just nodded and went back to his cereal. On Monday morning, Anthony sat in the office of Marcus Brennan, a highly recommended divorce attorney in Charlotte who specialized in family law. Marcus was a 45-year-old man, experienced, known for being aggressive but fair. Anthony laid all the documentation on the desk, the photos, the messages, Ethan's disclosure. Marcus examined everything with a professional eye. "This is solid. North Carolina is one of the few states where adultery still matters legally. We can use this not just in the divorce, but to secure primary custody of your son. The fact that the child was exposed to the situation is especially relevant." They discussed strategy for 2 hours. Anthony left the office with divorce papers already being prepared. In the days that followed, Anthony also hired a forensic accountant to audit the couple's finances. That's when he discovered something that made everything even worse. Natalie had withdrawn nearly $8,000 from their joint savings account over the past 4 months, small withdrawals here and there that Anthony hadn't noticed because he'd been focused on work. When questioned by email, since they were no longer speaking directly, Natalie vaguely claimed it was for personal expenses and home improvements. But Anthony now knew the truth: hotels, restaurants, gifts for David, all paid with money that should have been saved for Ethan's future. What Natalie didn't know, and what Anthony didn't know at the time, was that David was simultaneously involved with another soccer mom. Karen, a 35-year-old divorcee whose son played on the same team as Ethan. Karen had started suspecting David a few weeks earlier when she found strange messages on the shared tablet he occasionally used at her house. The Tuesday after Anthony confronted Natalie, Karen followed David to the same residential apartment James had photographed, and saw Natalie arrive 20 minutes later. Karen didn't confront them then. She waited. On Friday, during soccer practice, with at least 20 parents present and kids running around the field, Karen walked straight over to where David and Natalie were talking. Her voice cut through the afternoon air. "So it's you. You're the other one." Natalie turned, confused. "Excuse me?" Karen was shaking with anger. "David and I have been together for 3 months. He told me he loved me. And now I find out he's got you, and probably others. What kind of woman are you, destroying families for a man who sees you as just another conquest?" The scene that followed was chaotic. David tried to calm Karen, then tried to deny everything, and finally admitted the truth when she showed him messages on her phone proving their affair. Other parents started gathering, sensing the drama. One mother pulled out her phone and started recording. Natalie was in tears, trying to explain she didn't know about Karen, that David had told her he was single. Karen laughed bitterly. He told me the same thing. And probably all the others too. The video of the confrontation circulated through the parents' WhatsApp groups that same night. By Saturday morning, practically everyone connected to Charlotte's youth soccer team had seen it. David was suspended from the program by Monday. Natalie immediately became persona non grata. Other moms who'd once been friends blocked her. Birthday party invitations for Ethan's classmates stopped coming. In Charlotte's social circles, where people were connected through schools, sports clubs, and business networks, the story spread like wildfire. Natalie had worked with several local clients in her digital marketing consultancy. 3 of them ended their contracts in the following weeks, vaguely citing strategic changes, but making it clear they didn't want professional association with someone involved in such a scandal. The divorce proceeded quickly by North Carolina standards. With clear evidence of adultery and demonstrable impact on Ethan, the judge granted Anthony primary custody. Natalie would get supervised visits initially, with a possible review after 6 months depending on the child's psychological evaluation. The asset division heavily favored Anthony. He would keep the house, Natalie would be responsible for repaying half of the unauthorized savings withdrawals, and she would cover her own legal fees. The agreement also stipulated that Natalie couldn't introduce any romantic partner to Ethan without Anthony's and the child's therapist's prior approval. 8 months passed. It was June, early summer. Anthony was at a networking event for architects downtown, a cocktail reception in a luxury hotel with views over the city. He was chatting with Rebecca, a talented landscape designer who just told a funny story about a client who wanted a giant swan-shaped fountain in his garden. Anthony genuinely laughed, something he hadn't done in a long time. That's when he saw Natalie across the room. She looked visibly different, thinner, but not in a healthy way. Her hair, which she'd always worn long and well-maintained, was now shorter and lacked its former professional shine. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the designer clothes she used to prefer. She was with a man Anthony didn't recognize, someone who seemed uncomfortable in the corporate setting. When Natalie's eyes met Anthony's across the room, she quickly looked away, shame flashing across her face. She turned and whispered something to the man beside her, who briefly glanced in Anthony's direction before they both walked off to another part of the event. Rebecca noticed Anthony's distraction. "Everything okay?" He blinked and refocused on her, smiling. "Yeah, just saw someone I knew in another life." Rebecca tilted her head, curious, but didn't press further. Their conversation flowed naturally into a discussion about a potential collaborative project between architecture and landscaping. Anthony genuinely enjoyed Rebecca's company. They'd gone out a few times over the past 2 months, nothing serious yet, just easy dinners and conversation. She knew about the divorce, about Ethan, and respected the cautious pace Anthony needed to keep. When the event ended and Anthony left the hotel, he didn't scan the room for Natalie. He felt no need for a final word, a last confrontation, or any additional closure. She'd made her choices and now lived with the consequences. He'd made his, protecting his son and his own dignity. He drove home, where Ethan was with a babysitter and likely already asleep. On the way, he thought about how life can completely change in just a few months. An innocent child's drawing had revealed a truth that destroyed a marriage, but paradoxically, it had freed Anthony from a lie that could have dragged on for years. Ethan was doing well, all things considered. Child therapy was helping. The boy still loved soccer and had joined a new team at a different club. He occasionally asked why mommy and daddy didn't live together anymore, and Anthony answered with age-appropriate honesty. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, and when that happens, it's better for them to live apart. But both mommy and daddy love you very much, and that will never change. That seemed to satisfy the boy for now. Anthony parked in the garage and quietly entered through the side door. The babysitter, a 60-year-old woman named Dorothy he'd hired 3 months earlier, was reading on the couch. She smiled when she saw him. He was an angel tonight. Fell asleep at 8:30. Anthony thanked her, paid her, and waited until she left before heading upstairs. He peeked into Ethan's room and saw the boy sleeping soundly, hugging a well-worn stuffed bear he'd had since infancy. Anthony stood there for a moment, just watching, feeling a wave of protective love so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. He went back downstairs to the living room, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat on the couch in the dark, lit only by the city lights coming through the windows. He thought about betrayal, trust, how 9 years of marriage could unravel in 4 months of lies. He thought about Natalie, where she was now, who she was with, whether she felt regret or just self-pity. He thought about David, who'd probably already found new victims in another town, another soccer team, other vulnerable women. He thought about choices and consequences, how every decision we make sends ripples that affect not just ourselves but everyone around us. But mostly, Anthony thought about the future, about rebuilding a life that now had room for authenticity instead of pretense, about raising Ethan to be a man of integrity who understood that real love means honesty, respect, and loyalty, about maybe, eventually, finding someone who valued those same things. Rebecca was interesting, intelligent, honest. Maybe it could become something more with time. Or maybe not. For now, Anthony was learning to be comfortable on his own, to find strength within himself instead of relying on someone else for validation. He finished his whiskey, washed the glass, and headed upstairs to bed. Before lying down, he picked up his phone and scrolled through recent photos. There was one of Ethan with his new soccer team, grinning widely while holding a ball. Another of an architectural project he'd completed last week, a modern design that had earned praise from the client. A photo Rebecca had sent of a garden she was designing, asking for his opinion on the layout. Small moments of a new life being built on the ruins of the old. Anthony placed the phone on the nightstand and lay back, staring at the ceiling in the dark. He didn't know exactly what the future held. But he knew he'd made the right choices. He'd protected his son. He'd preserved his dignity. He'd refused to accept lies for the sake of convenience. And in that, amid all the pain and destruction Natalie's betrayal had caused, there was a strange sense of peace. The peace that comes from knowing you acted with integrity, even when it was hard. The peace of knowing you didn't let someone else's bad actions diminish you. The peace of closing one door and knowing that on the other side, there was a chance for something better. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in months, slept deeply, without disturbing dreams, without waking in the middle of the night with his mind racing. Just the restorative silence of sleep belonging to someone who'd weathered the storm and survived, not just intact, but stronger than before. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.